Welcome to Beyond the Matrix with Rod Bryant and Jerry Gordon here on Israel News Talk Radio. Unplug, strap yourself in because you are about to move beyond the Matrix.
Welcome, YouTube viewers. We really appreciate you guys watching us on YouTube. Really appreciate it. Jerry Gordon and I have been experimenting with this over the last few weeks, and frankly, we're pretty pleased. And so I want to remind you to share it with your friends. Let people know that you're watching us on YouTube, and also share it on your Facebook page if you don't mind. That helps us get more viewers. Today, we're going to have Stephen Bryen on. We're getting ready to do an official introduction, so stand by for just a little bit, and we're getting ready to start in 3, 2, and 1.
Welcome to Beyond the Matrix with Rod Bryant and Jerry Gordon here on Israel News Talk Radio. Unplug, strap yourself in because you are about to move beyond the Matrix.
Officially, you have arrived to
Start it again.
Nothing like a bad start.
You got one more try, or else we're going to put you in a can.
Yeah, the problem is the viewers on YouTube are going to see that, and the audience is never going to hear it because I'm going to make sure that that's edited out. Okay, here we go again. How embarrassing is that? I think I've only done that probably 3 times in all the years I've been on the station. Okay, here we go. In 3, 2, and 1.
Welcome to Beyond the Matrix with Rod Bryant and Jerry Gordon here on Israel News Talk Radio. Unplug, strap yourself in because you are about to move beyond the Matrix.
And you have officially moved beyond the Matrix. You're listening to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio. I'm Rod Bryant, along with my amazing co-host, Jerry the G-Man Gordon. I like G-Man. That sounds unique, but that kind of reminds me of the other G-Man, G. Gordon. Remember G. Gordon Liddy?
Yes, there's a story I could tell your listeners later about that.
Oh, really? Oh, okay, you got an interesting story. We all have interesting stories. By the way, if you're not watching on YouTube, we thank you for listening to it here on Israel News Talk Radio. Please leave us an email or comment especially if you're watching it on the podcast format. Leave comments on that. Really appreciate it. Jerry, we have a guest that's familiar to everyone here, Stephen Bryen, and we're actually going to be giving our audience an update on the COVID, but some of the investigative aspects of it and how does that relate to us. So why don't you once again introduce our illustrious guest?
Our illustrious guest is a doctor in political science, I think, but he was a former Capitol Hill staffer who ended up in the Reagan administration as being a deputy undersecretary for technology and security. So he knows his stuff. He's a foremost military technologist in the U.S. He's an Asia Times columnist. His take on the coronavirus epidemic, if you want to call it that, is follow the numbers. It's sort of like the Joe Friday video clip that some people have seen from the 1950s saying, just give me the facts, man.
Right. Just give me the facts, ma'am. Look, and it's really important. Explain to them why he is such an expert in this aspect of facts.
Well, that's primarily what his professional activity is all about, both in terms of national security stuff, but also in terms of what he writes from his column.
Right.
Asia Times.
I am impressed by the fact, if the audience doesn't see this most of the time, but when he comes on, he'll have a stack of papers of research that he's done on the subject matter. So he's not coming here just spinning stuff. He's actually talking about the numbers. So just the facts, ma'am, is what we're expecting. So we're getting ready to go into a break. When we come back, we'll have Stephen Bryen with us. You listen to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio. Beautiful. Beautiful. Hold on a second. Okay.
The usual MO applies. If you can get me the audios, I can work on that this afternoon.
I'll have the audios up to you. I'm going to go eat brunch.
I don't know. It's only 11 o'clock.
Yeah, I normally eat.
How long have you been up for?
Or something. So I normally only eat twice a day. So I'll eat lunch and mid-afternoon sometimes.
The opposite. I eat a real breakfast as much as I can, and something at lunch and a snack later.
Yeah. Actually, I've actually thought about going back to that because breakfast has always been my primary meal. Like
Yeah.
I could do without supper. I just can't. Breakfast is big. So usually at 11 when I eat, I eat a very hearty breakfast style meal, but it's at 11, well, 12. So, okay, I'll send this up after I finish doing my stuff. And I really appreciate your hard work. How's Jean doing, by the way?
She's doing okay. But we do have one concern.
Yeah.
The anti-seizure medication is on back order and won't be available to June. We found a source for it.
Gabapentin?
Yeah, it's called Kepfer.
Okay.
And we're trying to get our neurologist to send a script electronically to the folks at Express Scripts, which we called yesterday, and has the stock of that stuff available and get a 90-day supply.
Yeah, that's.
And I was shocked when I went to Walmart pharmacy the other day. The guy came over and said, "I'm sorry, but all we can give you is less than 2 weeks because the whole thing has, quote, been back ordered to the end of June."
How does a pharmacy manufacturer get in a situation where that kind of medicine, which is important, gets back ordered?
Well, the importance is that Express Scripts does it for a bunch of academic retirees clear across the United States.
Oh, really?
A big footprint in terms of bulk purchase.
Right. Got you.
Okay.
Got you. But that's the right before the pandemic, they were already talking about it, and they were talking about possibly quarantine and stuff like that. I was contacted by my pharmacy that said, "Look, there's a couple of items we're going to send you right up front. That's going to be a longer supply because we're expecting this particular item to be on demand." So they sent it to me, and I've got it in the cabinet. So we'll see what happens. Well, good. I'm glad she's doing okay. She hasn't had any seizures. No,
she hasn't since December, which is, knock on wood, what we'd like to see carried forward.
How's she getting around? I mean, is she walking okay? I mean,
she's walking with a cane, and she's still using her rollerator where she feels more secure. But yesterday I took her out in the hallway for what were 3 laps.
Good.
So
now you guys aren't getting out at all?
I'm getting out. I have to forage, and I have to have a conversation today with my erstwhile rabbi about when we start doing stuff inside our sanctuary for services.
Yeah, I don't, even if they were opening it up, here in Texas, they've opened up religious institutions.
Yeah, I know. Same here in Florida.
But none of the Jewish community has even thought about going back.
There's a couple of reasons for it. Just think about it. The service that we typically have on Shabbat means that you have to have 2 gabai up on the platform, 1 or 2 Torahs taken out. And it's
you have aliyah, right?
Yeah. And that's the other issue.
Yeah, I most definitely can see that. So I don't know. We're still going to hold out. We're doing all of ours online, but to be honest with you, last Sunday we had like 56 people in one class. That's a lot of people to have on Zoom, but it worked well.
But that was pure Zoom. They weren't in attendance.
No, pure Zoom. And what was nice though is we had some people that were like, we had a group from the Jewish community in Dallas that they've been coming to our meetings. First, it was a brother, and then his 2 sisters and father started joining. So they're all watching on one screen. I guess they had on television. You can see them all sitting on the couch. It's pretty neat.
That's good.
This virtual thing has worked out.
Yeah, it has for us, and meaning you and I, and it's also expanded the audience, I think.
Now you guys haven't been doing virtual Shabbatons or anything like that, or
We have been, well, I suggested, and we've been building it for over a month and a half now, is basically series of YouTube videos that we've done with Rabbi giving curtailed versions of Shari
that's a good idea. Yeah.
and the other stuff.
The problem is most people in your shul are probably not very technically proficient to get on Zoom.
No, but I'll tell you one thing. When we did a Zoom Yizkor service, a memorial service at the tail end of Passover, we must have had 23 people.
Wow.
On Zoom.
Wow. How big is your shul? I mean, in age?
We're not terribly big. I think we have probably 75 members at this point in time. Good
age demographic is
pretty far tilted towards the older groups.
Yeah, I hate to say that, but that's generally I mean, I would say from 30, 35 and up, and we have some children here and there, but it's mostly older people.
Yeah, it is older people, but the convert classes are probably somewhere between late 30s and mid 60s.
Now, have they already finished their conversion requirements? Or
well, this is a second full class that we've done, and the biggest problem for us is queuing up for the mikvah, which is up in Mobile, who have way a significant volume of converts essentially going over there.
Beautiful.
Interesting.
There's a rabbi in LA.
Yep.
Who actually has an online conversion course. I know that sounds hinky, but
well, it's very interesting.
Yeah, his idea is this: we're running out of Jews because people are not, attending synagogue. So I want to make as many Jews that want to be Jews. And so he's got it. It's about a 6-month study program. And it's
how long is it?
The course itself, it's self-paced, but they say generally within 6 months. And then after that, you do a series of interviews, and then you fly to LA to meet the base din, or you do the base din on Zoom, which is brilliant idea.
Does that mean you fly to LA and he sets up
a base din?
Mikvah?
Yeah, and mikvah in the Homeland.
Base din. Yeah.
Now, if you don't do the mikvah there, he would call here and get the local mikvah to open up for you.
That's correct.
Yeah. So I'm really excited for those people.
Right. One of them is a great guy. He's actually a tropical medicine.
Was that the guy that's
Jim his name is Jim Beecham. He's actually reached out to you on occasion.
Yeah, he has. Is he former military?
Well, it's interesting. He was originally a commissioned officer in the U.S. Public Health Service.
Okay.
Then he switched over to U.S. Navy Med. And he was hired, basically retained, to be the tropical medicine specialist for the U.S. Navy in Southeast Asia.
Wow.
So he and I get along pretty well, and he's loved the program segments that we have done with Steve, a couple of others and stuff.
Good. And look, as if there's ever a time that we have a subject matter, I wouldn't mind bringing him on to talk about it.
Well, he cut his teeth on Legionnaire's disease in Philadelphia.
Oh, really? Well, I remember that was a panic, wasn't it?
You know what it was?
It was scary.
It was the bugs in the water tanks.
Yeah. That crazy?
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah. There was one other thing I was going to mention. I was going to say, when you mentioned the, what do you call it? They all wear uniforms. It's the
U.S. Public Health Service.
Yeah, U.S. Public Health Service.
Right.
So I'm just a fresh, brand new lieutenant, right? And I'm walking into the commissary or whatever, PX, and I see this guy comes out like Admiral, right? I'm like, I freaked out. Like, so I just gave him a quick salute and he goes, dude, I don't even know how to do that. And walked past me. I'm like, what was that all about? I thought he's disrespecting me, right? And somebody else said, no, he's public health. These guys don't have a clue about a lot of protocol.
You ought to go on to Amazon Prime if you have.
I have Amazon Prime.
All right, and there's a famous classic movie in 1950 called Panic in the Streets.
Okay, never heard of it. Let me write it down.
It's all about an epidemic in New Orleans.
Dadgummit.
And not working.
The one pen that I use all the time is not working. It's ridiculous.
Well, here, I'll give you this one.
Okay.
There's the virtual pen.
Panic in the Street. You remember, I just remembered this. It's about a group of guys on a little Navy supply ship. Mr. Robertson's?
Yeah, Mr. Roberts.
That is my all-time favorite
film.
It is funny. It has this whole interaction between between a maniacal leader. It is just. Matter of fact, I think I'm gonna watch it again. I haven't watched it in a couple of years.
Oh, it's one of the better ones. It's got the late James Cagney as the captain, who says, "Who stole my palm?"
Who stole my palm?
Right.
And let's
and Ensign Pulver.
Brilliant dude, brilliant Ensign Pulver. Oh, and it was interesting how every one of these guys, the doc was like, hey, look, man, just live with it. There's nothing much we can do about it. Let's just kind of drive on. But the interesting personalities and how they deal with this lunatic as a commander. Oh,
well, and the other version of that is Humphrey Bogart in the Caine Mutiny.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
That's more dramatic.
That is much more dramatic. So anyway, Jerry, be blessed and have a wonderful day.
You too, babe. Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The first thing that we want to do is welcome the YouTube viewers that are watching us on YouTube. Thank you so much for your comments. They've really been good. And also the number of views within a single day has, really increased. We really appreciate it. Also take time to share if you don't mind. And we really appreciate if you click right there. And I know you guys can't see it, but I can't either, but it's imaginary. It's right there.
It's the
click on the
virtual subscribe button.
Do what?
It's the virtual subscribe button.
Yeah, the virtual subscribe button. Exactly. Okay, guys, we're going to get started with the show. So stand by. As we say in television and movie production, quiet on the set. Okay, in 3, 2, and 1.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
I'm Rod Bryant, along with Jerry Gordon and our very distinguished guest, Stephen Bryen. We've had him on several times in the past, and of course, no different. We're going to have some great content that we want to provide you. We're going to be talking about the latest update in the investigation into the creation of the virus that has held our world in its grip for the last, month, 2 months almost now. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Jerry, why don't you go ahead and start with the volley of questions that we have?
Okay. Over the weekend, an alleged Five Eyes intelligence dossier was leaked to an Australian newspaper about China's cover-up of the Wuhan lab. Who are the Five Eyes, and what were the dossier's allegations and the criticism of it? Steve?
Well, the Five Eyes, first let's start there because that's it. These are the 5 countries that cooperate in a special way on intelligence, and they're the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. That's 5. Those get really, they share information, mostly intelligence, in a unique way. It's highly classified usually. They very rarely ever make a statement that says the Five Eyes have said. So
that's why I was really shocked when I heard that. I'm like, whoa.
I don't know what we were seeing actually. Somebody wrote a report and said this is Five Eyes agreed content. You know, they've repudiated it mainly by now for a couple of reasons. One political and one operational. The operational one's clear. They should never do anything like that.
Right.
And I don't blame them for pulling it on that basis. And the political one is that the Chinese went nuts. The U.S. CDC and NIH went nuts, and they said, "What are you doing? This is wrong." So the bottom line is that it has been yanked. What did it say? It actually said that the conditions at the Wuhan lab were very bad. That's not up to snuff, but that's not news. I mean, we've known that for some time. It didn't say that the virus came from the lab. That's a big distinction, or that the virus was man-made. Neither of those things was said. So, Rod, you said at the very onset, you know, the so-called investigation. I would contend it's not possible for a number of reasons to do an investigation, and none will be done. And here's my reasoning. First of all, China has blocked any inquiries from outside. No one can go to China under any basis with the cooperation of the Chinese because they're not cooperating. So that's point one. Point two, connected with that, is the fact that they've already sanitized just about everything that could be investigated anyway. So there's no chance that you could go in there and find anything because there's nothing to find. Point three is that anyone in China that has raised the issue of concern about the lab or concern that it was man-made, all those things have been suppressed. They've pulled papers off the internet. They have removed some of the scientists. A few of them have groveled and apologized for being wrong. I mean, the usual kind of this communist approach to these sort of problems. So the ability to do an investigation from that perspective is very limited. Now, on the other side of the coin, the people who would do the investigation, namely the CDC, the National Institute of Health, or in Australia, the equivalent organizations, Japan, the same, all of them are compromised. All of them were cooperating with the Wuhan lab, had contracts with the Wuhan lab, were conducting research on bats with the Wuhan lab, and they want to hear about it. I mean, there's a sort of conspiracy here in a way to avoid implicating each other. And so they want this virus to be a naturally occurring virus that happened in the Wuhan wet market or something like that. That's as good an excuse as any. And they want to walk away from this and say nothing else. You know, that's the end of it.
Stephen, what about the veracity of the information you spoke about last week of the researcher, I believe you said in France, that was saying that this most definitely was a hybrid mixed with AIDS or human illness?
There's two things. His name is Dr. Luc Montagnier. He's a Nobel laureate. He's not someone you could scoff at. I mean, you can call him any name you want, but he's a legitimate, serious, first-class scientist, microbiologist, and he's the guy that discovered HIV.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Yeah, that's why he got the Nobel Prize. See, they didn't know what it was at first. People were getting sick, especially in the gay community, where people were getting these terrible diseases, but they didn't know what it was. It turned out it's a virus that's sexually transmitted, and that was discovered by Montagnier. So he knows what he's talking about, and he knows how to do inquiries about how viruses are composed and what the components are and all that. He's an expert. Of course, he's created a furor with his suggestion that the coronavirus has fragments of HIV in it. But we know, because we have already in hand papers that the Chinese and others, partners with, including US partners, have written, who were attempting to use coronavirus and HIV to build a HIV vaccine, which would be a great thing. I mean, absolutely a great thing. That was around 2015 when that work was being done. So Montagnier's suspicion is borne out by research that was going on. Now, it was also the same thing that the Russians thought they found.
Okay, so it's been corroborated somewhat.
So it's somewhat corroborated. Yeah. I mean, it's you have to know what you're looking for, and I think what's interesting to me is that all the discussion. Initially, a lot of the virologists who specialize in this sort of thing were saying, "Oh, it's a naturally occurring, this unusual, but it's novel." They call it novel, and it's zoonotic in the sense that it's passed from animals to people. But that it was, there was nothing in there that didn't suggest natural. That conversation about what's called the genome of the virus, how the components of the virus, has dropped off considerably. There was a lot of talk in the beginning, and now there's no more talk. And I think they can't sustain it because they can't prove it. So maybe Montagnier is right. There's some reasons to believe that. There's one very important reason to believe that he's right. And I'll tell you what it is. What Montagnier says, any man-made virus will decompose at some point.
Right. I remember you saying that last week.
In other words, it's not stable.
Right.
Okay. It'll go for a while, and then it will naturally decompose. And you'll see that, in the drop-off of cases, you'll start to see that it becomes weaker.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a sign that, no, I'm not a virologist. I'm not even a doctor. I have no scientific credibility, whatever. And I don't want to say anything that's wrong, but I can understand what he's trying to tell us. And he's trying to tell us that you should see a declining curve. Well, guess what? We're seeing a declining curve in Europe, right. Okay, Germany, Italy, Spain. They're all starting to get off of the requirements of the lockdown. They're easing the restrictions because the number of cases is dropping fairly rapidly. Israel, same story. New Zealand's down to 0.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
So really, it's to our better interest if it was man-made or created, right?
Presumably, in a sense, yeah. I mean, ironically, I would say.
Right. Ironically.
Now, so there's another piece of information, and I'll do it very quickly because I understand what you're telling me. Basically, in Arizona, they have discovered some people, at least one person, with coronavirus, but it's a different coronavirus. It's a mutation, and it's much weaker, and it's missing certain components.
Oh, okay.
And it's a mutation. But that's what he was talking about. This kind of mutation will get it weaker, and it will disappear. So that's what we may be seeing now. We may be seeing. I hope we're seeing.
Well, I hope so. Jerry, you have something in about a minute. You have 45 seconds.
Notwithstanding that kerfuffle, yesterday the U.S. Department of Homeland Security released a report critical of China's handling of the whole matter. What were the allegations?
And we're going to have to do a quick wrap up, and then we'll come back into it after the break. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, the quick answer is that the cover-up. They've covered up everything, so it's impossible to know what really happened.
So at this point, the only thing that we really have is speculation, maybe some intelligent guessing on exactly what happened. But you already said that the lab itself had some weaknesses in its protocol, correct?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. And so it's like an accident waiting to happen. The interesting thing is when we come back from the break, you can expound on that if you'd like. But the question that I have is about support for that particular lab from, or grants from this country to that lab. And I'd like to talk about the nuances of that. I realize it's not a strange thing for this to take place. I mean, it's just part of the international research that takes place around the world. We do grants in a lot of different labs. So I'd like to understand that and help our listeners to be able to understand that. You're listening to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio. Just want to remind you, if you're listening on the podcast or on the station itself, you can watch the show, live stream it on the internet at YouTube. So go to Nativ, N-E-T-I-V online, one word, Nativ online, and you'll be able to watch it absolutely free. We'll be right back after these messages. Okay, beautiful. So stand by, guys. Schmooze among yourself. You don't have to be silent.
Steve, you want me to address the Echo Health Alliance?
No. No, I mean, I think this is all part of the same game. I'm not. I don't want to get involved in that. It's not interesting.
Yeah, I
want to go back to Rod's question.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that.
I think that's a worthwhile question.
So you guys that are watching on YouTube, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Make sure you leave us a comment about the show, what you think. And if you have any questions, we'll for sure turn it back. I appreciate also some personal emails that some people have sent, making comments and support, even sending documents. So if you have some information out there that could help us out in our research, make sure that you send it to us. I really appreciate it. This is trying to think. This is Tuesday or Wednesday.
This is Cinco de Mayo.
Well, you're in the United States or Mexico. Not even in Mexico.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Everywhere it's Cinco de Mayo.
Yeah. Are you sure you don't have the virus?
Well, I understand tequila is a good way to kick back
the anytime. So,
common colds. You just name it. Right up.
Kill anything, right?
Oh boy. Did you see that meme circulated around?
Remember what Benjamin Franklin said about beer? It probably applies to tequila too. He said that basically, we know God loves us because of beer.
Absolutely. So, absolutely. The gift of God.
Gift of God.
There was a meme circulating around with a bottle of Jack Daniels and a spray bottle. And it was saying,
kill the bugs.
Used to kill the virus.
Jack Daniels, I'm sorry.
It would be a terrible waste. Tragedy.
Yes, not a good idea.
No.
Gasoline or something.
Yeah, exactly. I bought a bottle of alcohol from one of the distillers around here. It was fairly cheap. And it actually smells like vodka. I don't know why it smells different than regular alcohol, but my wife was like, this doesn't smell like regular rubbing alcohol. I said, I don't think it is.
Well, they denature rubbing alcohol.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's supposedly you can't drink it.
I wouldn't take a chance. But however, my brother said he had a high school teacher that drank Dr. Tishner's out of the desk. Had a bottle of Dr. Tishner. It probably wasn't Dr. Tishner's, but
it's like like with gas stoves. The gas that comes into your house has a specific odor that's been put into it, so you can detect it. Otherwise,
right?
You wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know exactly.
Right.
Remind me to tell you guys the hilarious story. Maybe at another time where when I was a police officer, a guy attempted to commit suicide. I'll just tell it anyway. If we're in a break. Attempted to commit suicide by turning on all the gas in his house, right? Well, it didn't kill him. So he decided to light a cigarette. And when we got there, his clothes were blown off and he was sitting on the curb smoking another cigarette with his skin hanging off. It was not successful at all, but I'm sure the guy was going to be pretty miserable after that. Okay, here we go. In 3, 2, and 1.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
We are back from the break. Thank you so much for listening to Beyond the Matrix and making it a part of your education and information. We want to make sure that we give you all the best information we can. Before the break, Stephen, I was asking about grants that are given for research in different parts of the world, and specifically the Obama administration provided a grant to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Explain how that works and what is the significance of that.
Well, I think there's whether it's Obama or anybody else, really not irrelevant. It's not a political thing in that sense. The U.S., the Australians, the Japanese, the Canadians, probably the British, I'm not sure, the Italians and others, all have been cooperating with each other and with Wuhan and other laboratories in China.
Right.
It's been going on for a long time. And in these grants, they're not one-sided because they were matched by the Chinese government. So that you can't really, I mean, if all this was normal and everything was great, nobody would care, and that's
correct.
It's proper. They were all chasing the idea of finding vaccines for various kinds of viruses. Okay, that's presumably what was going on, and that's fine. I mean, it's dangerous, and the CDC knew it was dangerous, and in 2014, they stopped it for 3 years. They absolutely stopped it because they were afraid that the stuff would leak out.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, along those lines, the intelligence agencies knew that risk very well. The Defense Department knew that risk very well. In fact, a U.S. Army lab was closed up by the CDC for 2 months. That's, of course,
was that the one in Maryland? Where was that? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, that lab does a lot of secret research,
mm-hmm.
And some public research, but some of it's secret. And again, their main focus is finding vaccines. At least that's what they tell us. But the reason it was closed up, it was leaking. The sewage system wasn't working right. They were worried about contamination. They were not happy with practices they saw, and they just closed it for 2 months until it got fixed. So it happens here. If it happens here, you can imagine.
Oh, absolutely.
Other places, not just here. So now, that's the straight frontal story. The problem. There were a couple of other problems though that need some attention and haven't gotten it.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is that, particularly in Canada, we know this case very well, but also in the United States, in at least 2 cases I know, one in Detroit and one in Boston, and there may be others in Texas as well. Materials from these labs were being illegally, improperly smuggled back to China. And I believe that the reason the FBI was looking into it in the United States and the Royal Mounted Police in Canada were looking into it was that they thought intellectual property was being stolen.
Right.
Okay. That the Chinese wanted to be the first ones with the vaccine because there was a lot of money to be made. It's not biowar, but money. So it's probably more important than biowar anyway.
I would think so.
And so this illegal activity, or at least apparently illegal activity, was going on. In Canada, it was the lab in Winnipeg, where there were some Chinese scientists and students brought over from China to work in the lab. When they were all pushed out of the lab as a result of the allegedly improper transfer of materials. There's no court case. This thing's still theoretically under investigation. In Boston, there is a guy that's been indicted for taking samples from a hospital, I believe it was cancer materials, and sending them to China. I don't know what that's about. No one's really explained it.
Recently, there was charges filed on.
There's charges on him.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's charges on him. He's denying it. and has not gone to trial. And then in fact, he was put under house arrest, so now he's out of jail, but he still hasn't gone to trial. And then the case in Detroit didn't seem to result in any prosecution. So anyway, all this has been going on, and it has raised some real issues about how trustworthy you can be in these environments where there's so many strong commercial issues that are just under the surface that propel countries and individuals who want to get rich to do things they probably shouldn't do.
It is quite curious, Jerry. I'm going to bump it over to you next, but it's quite curious how the desire to be the first to make the most money has really benefited the world when it comes to research and being able to fix things and heal things. But at the same time, there isn't really a world body organization that regulates any of these things. I mean, you talked about the World Health Organization, but really?
Well, it's not their job either. I mean, no. This is the question is, every country has laws about protection of intellectual property,
right.
And if those laws are violated, then you have criminal cases.
Right. Jerry?
And civil cases.
Talking about research and mutation, there was a preliminary study released by a joint U.S. and British team that revealed that coronavirus could mutate, making it more contagious.
Yeah.
Why is this research finding of importance to other teams currently engaged in development of possible vaccines?
Well, if you believe it. I don't believe it. I mean, the evidence points the other way, doesn't it? It's not getting more, it's getting less. So the evidence points against that research, if it's research. I mean, I don't know where that came from. There's also these huge warnings. Dr. Fauci, again, is now saying, we're going to have another big whack of this stuff coming, a second wave, he calls it. How does he know that?
So I'm going to ask you, so let me just reemphasize this, because the listener is getting a full digest or diet of panic from the media and from who else?
A vested interest. There's a lot of people in Washington, D.C. that have a vested interest in beating on this because they want to beat on Trump.
Right.
I think this is a way to do it. It's really outrageous. But I mean,
but the evidence points to something else.
I think the evidence is pointing the other way.
So for the listener, and this would make it very clear, that we have to be careful as a society that consumes all of this reporting to look at the facts and not look at the hype. And in this case, I would like you to re-emphasize the facts for the listeners so they can understand what we're talking about. We talked about this whole flattening of the curve, and they're, sort of behind all of that now in some countries. Could you re-explain that? Because I think it would help boost the confidence of our listeners.
Well, I mean, we know already that in Europe, in most of Europe, other than France, but already even in Britain, which still has a very high number, it's starting to go down. In Germany, it's gone significantly down. In Italy, it's gone down. In Spain, it's gone down. So in New Zealand, it's 0. Japan is low, but it had a little bump, and now it seems like it's still pretty low. Korea is reopening now.
Mm-hmm.
China, I mean, we never can believe all the numbers from China, but China looks like it's normalizing. So the idea that this virus has a half-life is valid, I think. There's a very interesting study done by the Robert Koch Institute or Koch Institute in Germany, where they're measuring what they call the reproduction number of the virus. Okay, it means if one person is infected, how many other people does he infect?
Right.
The idea is that if this is going to show you the true curve, okay, the reproduction number in Germany is now below 1. That means it's not.
It was up to like it was up to like 6.
It was way up there. Yeah, it was way up there. Now it's down. It's down to 0.73, I think, last. And there's a very interesting professor of finance at Leibniz University, or Leibniz, I'm not sure the right pronunciation, on which day it is, I get it one way or the other, named Stefan Humberg, who says, that in fact, the value of the lockdown now is about zero. It's not stopping anything because it's stopping itself. So we flattened the curve to relieve the hospitals, but nobody's got a hospital problem right now.
Right. I don't know that we really had a serious hospital problem, but I don't think it was wrong either.
At the moment, maybe we did, but it's gone.
Yeah.
In England, they built 5 huge centers to treat people. They're empty.
Right.
Simply empty. They don't need them.
Yeah, there are.
The hospital
there are major.
Europe is going home.
Yeah, there are major centers, cities throughout the U.S. and Europe that built temporary hospitals that never had a single patient in it.
That's right. So, I think that the evidence, this we call empirical evidence, not some projection by some scientist who thinks he knows better, but empirically, right now, we have a reduction in the United States and everywhere else.
Brilliant explanation. We have one more segment left. We want to come back and ask a few more questions, but it helps to bring peace of mind to people who are listening to, like I said, a full smorgasbord of panic and danger. And it's actually, hopefully, going to be good news for us. You're listening to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio. Thank you so much for listening. If you have an email that you would like to send us, send it to rod@israelnewstalkradio.com. We'll be right back after these very few messages. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Jerry, what do you want to go do next, you and Stephen, for the last segment?
You want to talk about the new projections on what's going to happen by June 1st?
No. I think we already covered it, frankly.
What's that?
I think we really covered it because everything is, I think I'm sticking with the actual numbers, and the actual numbers, with exception of some hotspots, they're going down. And, and I think even in those hotspots, they're starting to figure out how to deal with it. You might want to talk about nursing homes and mass transit.
Actually, Steve, I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to ask you why the president has flown out to Arizona. And that's because he has, in fact, reached out to one of the vulnerable populations. It's the Navajo tribe in Arizona. So you can talk about that. And you can also talk about why Middle West in particular has seen a welter of cases arising out of meatpacking employees. There's 151 so-called meatpacking plants in the United States, and a lot of them, in my personal experience, are located in a range going all the way up the Mississippi River Valley.
Well, I think by the pure nature of how they work and the close environment that these meatpackers work, he couldn't help but spread the stuff.
Well, it's the environment, the closed environment, which is, part of it. And
right.
The other part of it is these are largely people who live in very close together conditions at home. So it's easy for them to import the virus into the workplace. So you've got a kind of problem there that what we're seeing in New York, and another example, we see in some of the really densely populated areas where people are squeezed together, or where communities are close, very integrated with each other, that you tend to get into a lot of trouble with this because it spreads easily.
Well, I will tell you I will tell you a personal experience, and that is Emporia, Kansas, in 2007, had a death of a Somali worker in a beef plant, I think for Tyson's. And that was discovered by the Kansas Department. And the net result of that was that the entire plant ultimately was shut down, was cleaned up and shut down by them. But it is indicative of the fact that a lot of the employees not only are working close together, but they also come from past heritage environments where public health is not a standard. And that's the case we found out in Greeley, Colorado, back in around 2010, when they had a series of episodes out there as well. And that's the Brazilian boys who own JBS meatpacking.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of, I mean, there's definitely a public health type issue that has to be addressed in terms of how communities live and how they care for each other, and the standards they follow. But there's also a question of what you do and how you mitigate risk in densely packed environments,
right?
Whether it's a meatpacking plant or a subway. And to me, that's we're not addressing that the way we should, I think. Even in the nursing homes, we're not addressing it the way we should.
Right. That's something I want to talk about when we come back from this break, because this is really good information. I do think, and I'll say this when we come back from the break, but I believe that this is going to change our way of handling just common life in the future. Because if we did this, could you imagine? I'm not talking about isolating ourselves, but just careful, washing your hands, protecting yourself. We could dramatically decrease regular influenza and other diseases.
That's true.
Okay, guys, stand by for 1 second.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
If you're watching us on YouTube, I want to say thank you again for watching us. And if you haven't watched Beyond the Matrix on YouTube, you can do it right now, at least get this last segment in. Go to Netiv, Netiv online, and subscribe and watch the show. You're getting a lot of information in the break that you're not necessarily getting on the show, because we just sort of accidentally get into these conversations. We try to bring it back into the show, but just want to let you know you're missing a lot of great content. Jerry, you guys had struck up a conversation during the break that I was not fully paying attention to, but I thought it was important that we talk about it now.
Yes. Today, President Trump is flying out to Arizona to visit one of the more vulnerable populations in the U.S. to the COVID-19 coronavirus, and that's the Navajo tribe. And on top of that, there's a spike, if you want to call it that, that's a pun intended, in essentially meatpacking companies and workers all throughout the middle part of the United States. There's an estimated 5,000 plus cases that have erupted, a couple of dozen deaths in that regard. And these are close, closed environments. Add to that, the workers in those environments are typically immigrants or refugees by origin and have demonstrably bad public health standards in their community and lack of access. So, Steve, why don't you take that ball and run with it?
Well, well, you've already sort of answered your own question in a sense. I mean, the problem of packed environments is something that is still troubling around the United States and in other parts of the world. One example is nursing homes, which is terrible. And they're not, most of the nursing homes are just average people that are older and they're being cared for because they're elderly and have certain physical impairments or even sometimes have diseases like Alzheimer's and so on. And so they can't really take care of themselves. So people come in there to take care of them. And unfortunately, they may bring in the virus, and they have in some really tragic circumstances. And because they're closed environments, it spreads like crazy. And it's the devastation has been considerable, not only here, but in Italy and in Israel and in England, and it goes on and on. It's a mess. And then we have other kinds of packed environment. You mentioned slaughterhouses, which is one where people work very closely together and often come from immigrant communities who are also living very closely together, packed together because they don't have many people to a room because they don't have money to live in a different way. And then you have mass transit. And in New York, I'll give you just, they finally decided to close the subway at night because the homeless people were living in the subway cars. They just discovered this. I mean, and of course, the spread of homeless people who are living on the street, have no sanitation really, is very dangerous. And worse than that, then people get on the trains, and the same as in the UK, and I've seen it there, and the same as in France, and they're packed together, and half of them aren't wearing masks, and 3/4 of them are sneezing. So the spread of a virus through that modality is very high, and what applies to subway cars applies to buses too. It applies to Amtrak. It applies to airplanes. It's
right.
all over the place. So we really need a strategy. And I think that I'm a little disappointed that our government hasn't emphasized this. We need a strategy to deal with these cramped places. I mean, I would say that everybody that gets on a subway train, for example, ought to have a mask.
A mask.
Required. Right. Don't get on if you don't have a mask. I would almost be willing to say they ought to have gloves on, but at least a mask. And there ought to be wipes there on the way in and the way out so people can wipe their hands. Sanitizing wipes. These are not expensive things to do, and they would be tremendously helpful in stopping the spread of not only coronavirus, but lots of other viruses, and including even the common cold or strep throat or whatever you want to talk about. So it's time for us to, if you want to talk about practicing hygiene, this is a way we could practice hygiene on a long-term basis that would be very important.
Steve, we're in the midst of something called Operation Warp Drive. That's the attempt to develop vaccine against the coronavirus. In fact, today they announced 2 trials, one's in New York and one's elsewhere, that may have some interesting developments. And the people in England at the Oxford are talking about having something available by the end of June.
Yes, they're testing now.
They are.
Yes, and also in Israel, there are two organizations. One in the Upper Galilee, which has developed what they think is a vaccine, and the other and has crowdfunded some $12 million to get started on testing. And the other one is supported by the Israeli Ministry of Defense. That's a private group, but they also have started testing. And I believe there's some testing going on in Australia. I'm not sure about Japan, but I think there was some in Japan, and there's some in China. So there are lots of efforts being made to come up with a vaccine, and there are also a lot of efforts being made to come up with the drugs that'll treat the disease, either when someone already is infected, or sometimes just as a preventative. If you take it, you don't get it. I mean, this is hydroxychloroquine is one of those things that an Italian researcher has now found actually does act as a prophylactic. And if you're people who've been taking it for malaria on a regular basis, don't get, for the most part, don't get the coronavirus. They just don't. So the stuff seems to have seems to work. And she has gone to this Italian researcher has gone to some effort to explain why. So yeah, we're starting to move in this. I'm thinking by fall we'll have a vaccine.
But there's a problem with testing in this country. Apparently a big brouhaha arose over the FDA's handling of antibody tests, which are not terribly accurate at this point in time. And yesterday, former commissioner of the FDA, Scott Gottlieb, suggested that the big push should be made on antigen tests, because they can be dirt cheap, relatively speaking, and they could be coordinated with some of the vaccines that are basically not only in development, but one in particular, remdesivir, that Galilee Sciences and the government believes can be helpful for more severe cases in that regard.
Well, it seems to have had some. There's two studies on remdesivir. One is a test that the company Gilead Sciences did in Chicago, which had fairly good results, and one that was done in China, which had completely negative results. And there's a reason for that. The reason was that the Chinese went and patented remdesivir, even though it's already patented by Gilead. And they want to show that the drug's no good so they can work a deal with Gilead and get it cheap. I think that's what's going on. But anyway, I mean, that's my surmise as a guess. But it seems to me that this is a very highly active field right now in terms of the efforts to find a solution. And I'm just not sure whether by the time we have a solution, the whole thing will be over anyway.
Or not.
Or not. I mean, who knows? If you believe what Fauci's telling us, we're going to have another wave of it. And people can be reinfected. But other guys say, no, you can't be reinfected. You already got it. So I think it's so noisy out there right now that the best thing to do is to do the numbers.
Right.
Just do the numbers and try not to be political. Just try to do the numbers and see where we're at and take steps you think are reasonable based on the numbers. That's why Germany is relaxing its controls, and they will all be going back to work pretty fast. Israel is significantly relaxing its controls. Italy has started to relax its controls, same with Spain, and the British are getting ready to, and we're getting ready to. So, I mean, the numbers are the numbers. Let's go with numbers and see what happens later on.
The Dr. Fauci from the very beginning appeared to be, he seemed to, what's the word for, wet on everyone's hopes that hydroxychloroquine was going to work, right? I realize he's a scientist and he wants empirical evidence. He needs stuff tight, but he seems to be the guy that seems to be most pessimistic. Is that why he's being paid to do what he does? Or what's going on?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think he's a sincere guy. I mean, I think, doctors are always very conservative. They're trained that way because, first of all, they don't want to injure anybody. And
right.
Secondly, because they don't want to be sued.
Yeah, false hope, too, can be a very dangerous thing as well.
Right. So, I mean, they are very cautious. And I think he was being very cautious. So that's all I can say about that.
Well, Stephen, it's been great having you on the show. As usual, you're a master of information and communicator. Really appreciate it. Guys, until this time next week, we're going to be saying shalom, and we'll see you the same time next week. And you guys are on YouTube. I really appreciate you sticking around, and you will have a little bit more content after the show. We call it the After the Show show. So anyway, until next week, we'll see you guys later. Everybody say shalom.
Shalom.
Okay, very good. I've got a issue here that I don't know what's going on, but all of our recordings are not showing up. I'm recording them, but after I render it, I can't find it. And that's strange. So
hasn't that happened before, Rod?
It has, and I'm not really sure, but I can pull the raw information off of the video. So we shouldn't really have to go back and record. It's just going to be a pain in the tuchus.
Well, why don't you simply strip off the audio track essentially from the stuff from this?
That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to strip it off because I'm exporting each one of these items out, and it's just for some reason. Oh, I see what it is. It's in another file. Never mind.
Never mind.
Never mind.
Hilda, what was her name? She was wonderful. Never mind. She did a routine about. She was married to not Mel Brooks. Who was the guy who
She's married to a comedian.
Yeah.
No, he was married to
Hilda Ratner, I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
That's the other guy in Connecticut
Yes.
Yeah. He's very funny too.
who I met.
Oh, really?
Oh, really?
But Hilda Ratner did this. She was a news reporter routine, and she would go blah 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 blah. And then she, never mind.
Never mind.
Maybe we should do that with our news reporters.
There you go. Never mind.
Well, you said you didn't like Trump. Never mind.
Have you guys ever been watching news and after they go to the remote location and they talk and they come back, you think, why did they waste their time? That was not a news item. It was it was a no news item. Like, hey guys, we're going to go out to a remote location for something that's completely benign and not germane to anything that's in life. But we're going to tell you anyway and hype it up at the same time.
Or they'll give you an interview and they'll spend half an hour video, and you get 3 seconds at most.
Right. I've actually seen it where they had a guy come on who's supposed to be an expert. He literally said 5 words.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? Why did they even waste their time putting his picture? They should have just put his picture up. Anyway, okay, so we've finished the show. Stephen, appreciate the information that you give. Your research is amazing. So, and for our viewers, look at that. Look, it's worth having you on. For our viewers on YouTube, we're going to say, guys, we'll see you guys later on. Thank you, and also subscribe and leave a comment on the page. Thank you very much.